Hi, this is a quick video about modal interchange chord scales in major keys and a little bit about how those chord scales are derived. This is not going to be a super exhaustive explanation. It's just going to be a very quick video, but I have another video where I go into more detail, which I will also link near this assignment. Okay, so the bottom line is that even though there's a wide variety of modal interchange chords, they can be grouped by chord type, and these are the 14 most common ones, in my opinion. And if you group them by chord type, the fact is that they all end up sharing the same chord scale in the end. So all the major 7 ones have Lydian as a chord scale and get those tensions. All the dominant chords that are modal interchange function typically use Lydian flat 7 with those tensions. Typically, any minor 7 modal interchange chords end up using Dorian, and minor 7 flat 5s end up using Locrian with these tensions. So even though you may not understand completely why this is, at least you can get started practically by knowing this information. And then as you work with it more and more, you'll see why these chord scales are so well suited to these particular chord types. Okay, so at this point in the video, if you stopped here and just started applying these chord scales to these chords, you would be off and running. You have a practical basis for using chord scales with modal interchange in a major key. But now the next part of the video, I'm going to try to explain why it is that these chord scales go with these chords. All right, here's an example of an exercise I like to do, and I encourage you to try it, where you do a 2-5, and then you insert a common modal interchange chord, and then you go to 1. So I've inserted a flat 2 major 7 here. So what happens with modal interchange is that basically you are importing a different sound into a major key, and often it's a darker sound. I would define darker as having more notes that are flatted against the tonic. So for example, a major 7 is not flatted against the tonic, minor 7 is flatted against the tonic. It's 1 half step closer to the tonic. The biggest one, of course, is a minor third. A minor third is a half step closer to the tonic than a major third. It gives you a darker sound. All right, so this chord, where's it coming from? Well, it's coming from a parallel key. It's coming from another C scale, not C major. And if you think about it for a minute, and think about what chords are derived from different scales, maybe you'll be able to figure out pretty quickly that this chord, flat 2 major 7, think about any mode that would begin with a major 7 chord only a half step above the tonic. And if you know your modes at all, you'll know that Phrygian is one of those modes. Another one is Locrian. And we typically pick the one that has the most notes in common with the parent major key that we're actually in. So let's think about Phrygian for a minute. Phrygian is the 3rd mode, and that means C Phrygian would be the 3rd note of a major scale. The major scale would be the parent major scale, the scale from which C Phrygian is derived. Remember, you're always borrowing from a parallel scale, so we're borrowing from a C scale. Okay, C Phrygian is the same as A major, right? C is the 3rd note of A flat major. C is the 3rd note of A flat major. So that means C Phrygian has the same notes, same key signature as A flat major. So if we want to figure out the chord scale for this, we have to go back to the parent, the place where this chord comes from. This chord comes from C Phrygian, which has the same notes as A flat major. So I'm going to put an A flat major key signature here. Just real quick. And really what I'm doing is I'm putting a C Phrygian key signature, okay? So let's bring this up here, okay? And if you understand this so far, you should be able to understand all the rest of it. If not, then you need to review your modes and understand that modes are just major scales transposed to start on different notes in that scale. So C Phrygian is the same as A flat major. All right, so I'm going to use the notes of A flat major. I've got them right here in my key signature. But since my mode is a C mode that I'm borrowing from, I'm going to start my notes on the note C, not on the note A flat. And I'm going to get these notes, which, if you look at the key signature, is C, D flat, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C. Those are the notes in C Phrygian. But my chord, which comes from C Phrygian, it's the second chord in C Phrygian. If I was to build up a chord right here, I would get a D flat major 7 chord. Okay? So that's where flat 2 major 7 comes from. If I want my chord scale for this chord, I can't write it starting on C. A chord scale must begin on the root of the chord. So what I need to do is keep all of these notes, but just start them on D flat to get my chord scale. So I'm going to get rid of this C and start my scale on D flat. And then I'm going to assess what the new scale is. Now that I'm not starting on C anymore, it's no longer a Phrygian scale. It was a Phrygian scale, but it is no longer because I'm starting on D flat. And I figure out what it is, and I do this by labeling everything. Now the first thing I find is that I have all the chord tones of D flat major 7, because of course D flat major 7 came from this scale originally. So I've got a 1, I've got a major 3rd right there, I've got a 5th, and I've got a major 7th, and of course there's the root again. And then for the non-chord tones, I have an E flat, which is a whole step above the D flat, and that means it's an available tension, a T9. I've got a G. I'll let you think about that for a minute. Is it a whole step or a half step above the F? How would we label it? And hopefully you got that it is a whole step above. It's an augmented fourth above the root, which means it's a T sharp 11. It's an available tension. And think about that one for a minute. The note is B flat above A flat. And hopefully you realize it's a whole step, which means it's a T13, not a 6, because 6 would mean it wasn't available. It is available. It's a whole step above the chord tone. So, and then you look at those tensions, you look at that, and hopefully by now you would know there's a Lydian scale. So that's the chord scale for flat 2 major 7. It came from C Phrygian, that's its source, but its chord scale, when we reorder those Phrygian notes starting on the root of the chord, D flat, we get a Lydian scale. All right, so that in short is the way that we derive chord scales for modal interchange. We go back to the source and then we import all of the notes from that source scale back into our key to be the chord scale, but we make sure we start those notes on the root of the chord. Well, it turns out that when we do that, we get Lydian for every single major 7 chord. Now, they don't all come from Phrygian, they come from other scales, but when we do that same process with the other scales too, we always end up with Lydian. And when you think about it, it's a really good choice, because Lydian is not going to make this chord sound like 1. We don't want these chords to sound like 1, we want them to sound like something other than 1. If we used Ionian, we would be tonicizing them too much. We would make them sound like maybe a new 1 chord, and we might be modulating. We don't want to modulate with modal interchange. We want to sound like we're just coloring the key, not modulating to a new key. All right, so that's as far as I'm going to go in this video, but hopefully you understood the basic process. And if you want to experiment yourself, you can think about, well, what other keys have a flat 3 major 7 in them? What other scales? What scales have a flat 6? And you'll probably think of more than one. And then you can try this process that I did with all of them, and you'll find that one of them is closer to the apparent key than the others. For example, if I had done Locrian here, I would have had to have a key signature with 5 flats here, and 5 flats is further away from C major than 4 flats is. So that's why I use C Phrygian and not C Locrian. And essentially, if you went through this process with all these chords, these are the chord scales you would end up with. All right. So for practical reasons, just memorize what chord scales go with what chord. But for understanding reasons, feel free to practice deriving a few more of them and see if you can prove this to yourself, that this is consistently going to help you end up with these scales. All right, that's it for now.